Back in the early 2000s, meat pies were everywhere. Bakeries, servos, footy games, but no one had turned them into a brand. Then came Wayne Homshek and Betty Fong, two ex-fashion execs with zero food industry experience and one big idea. Make the Aussie meat pie fun, fast, and Instagrammable before Instagram even existed. Their pies had faces, literally. Each one had a cheeky little expression baked into the crust. Sleepy, happy, angry, like edible emojis. Pair that with bright, modern stores, strong coffee, and slogan-heavy marketing, and suddenly you had something totally new. A pie chain with a personality. And for a while, it worked. Aussies were into it, investors were hyped, and the media couldn't get enough of the brand with the weird little winking pies. Pieface went from a single Sydney shop to dozens of stores across the country, and then, because why not, they even set their sights on the US. Pieface was on a mission to become the Starbucks of savory pastries. But behind the cartoon smiles, things were already starting to crack, and a few years later, it all collapsed. So how did a brand with global hype, national love, and serious investor money fall apart almost overnight? And how did a petrol station, Caltex, play the role of backstabber in the whole thing? By the early 2010s, Pieface was sprinting. What started as a cheeky pie shop in Sydney had become a full-blown franchise machine. There were around 80 stores across Australia and a bold expansion into the US, opening a store in New York. That kind of growth doesn't happen by accident. It's fueled by ambition, media hype, and supported by a business model built for rapid rollout. For Pieface, that meant franchising. The idea was to let everyday Aussies buy the right to operate their own Pieface store while the company provided the brand, the systems, and the product. It was positioned as a win-win. You bring the hustle and they bring the blueprint. At its peak, Pieface was a startup darling. The brand had charisma, the founders had polish, and the pitch was irresistible. Take an iconic Aussie snack, add a quirky twist, wrap it in bold branding, and roll it out to the world. Media outlets ran glowing stories about its rapid expansion. Business magazines hyped it as the next McDonald's. Investors lined up to grab a slice. Heavy hitters like Brett Blundy, the billionaire retail mogul behind Bras and Things and Honey Birdette, joined the table. Finance veteran Trevor Rowe, then chairman of Rothschild Australia, jumped in. Even global fund manager Caledonia reportedly chipped in $5 million. Pieface was riding a wave of optimism backed by people who are used to winning. The brand's co-founder, Wayne Homshek, once a Citigroup investment banker, had big goals and wasn't shy about sharing them. In a 2009 interview with BRW, he predicted Pieface would grow to over 1,000 outlets across Australia. The startup world loves a rocket ship, and Pieface had all the signs of one. Flashy branding, founders with media charm, a product that photographed well, and a model that looked endlessly scalable. But dreams cost a lot of money. The initial investment to open a Pieface store wasn't minuscule. Franchisees were reportedly putting down anywhere from $300,000 to $400,000 just to get started. That included fit-out costs, licensing fees, training, and all the equipment needed to meet Pieface's strict visual and operational standards. For many first-time business owners, that meant dipping into life savings, taking out loans, or signing personal guarantees. Some even remortgaged their homes. The promise was that once the store was up and running, the numbers would work. The brand had momentum and familiarity. The product was simple and beloved, and the system was proven and tested. But those assumptions didn't always hold up in reality. While Pieface HQ collected upfront fees and ongoing royalties, franchisees were left to wrestle with the daily grind of staffing, overheads, rent, electricity, equipment maintenance, and the unpredictable beast that is retail foot traffic. Some locations thrived, especially those in prime areas with high pedestrian flow, but many others struggled to attract consistent customers. Despite the promise of 24/7 trade, late night hours didn't always translate to meaningful sales, especially outside inner city nightlife zones. And because many locations were franchised into already saturated markets, store owners found themselves competing with other pie-face stores. As margins tightened, stress skyrocketed. Some operators started cutting shifts or reducing hours to manage payroll costs. Others dug deeper into personal savings to keep the lights on. For every success story, there were several franchisees who quietly disappeared, sold off their store at a loss, or burned out entirely. Pieface's business model was tilted heavily in favor of head office. Once a store was open and the franchise fee was paid, the company had already made its money. Whether the store thrived or tanked became the franchisee's problem. What looked like a scalable food empire from the outside was, for many on the inside, a high-risk gamble. It was a business that promised simple operations but delivered relentless pressure. And while the smiling pies on the signage told a light-hearted story, the reality behind the counter was anything but. For franchisees who bought into the dream, many found themselves not living it, but surviving it. As the Pieface empire grew, the facade of success started to show signs of strain. From the outside, the brand still looked like a winner, but behind the smiles and glossy signage, the ground was beginning to shift. The franchise model was starting to turn toxic. One of the biggest flashpoints was the supply chain. While Pieface sold this as a strength, it quickly became a major pain point for franchisees. All stores were required to buy their ingredients directly from Pieface-approved suppliers, many of which were controlled or closely linked to head office. While making sense at scale, it left store owners with no room to negotiate better prices or source locally. In some cases, ingredients that could be bought wholesale for a fraction of the cost elsewhere were marked up and resold to franchisees at inflated rates. The brand profited whether the store did or didn't. As margins shrank, many owners began questioning why the supposed benefits of brand affiliation came with so little operational freedom. Instead of feeling like business partners, they felt like customers of their own franchisor, locked into a system that extracted more than it provided. Take Brendan Wong, a former corporate worker who purchased a Pieface store in Sydney's Bondi Junction for $495,000 in 2009. He was sold on the dream, a vibrant brand, a promising business model, and what he believed was a safety net. A quote, profit protection plan that guaranteed $100,000 in his first year. But within months, the reality hit hard. Wong says the financials Pieface gave him didn't match what was happening in the store. The profit margins were razor thin, so thin, in fact, that he was making more on cans of Coke than on the pies and sausage rolls. Pieface had taken out a lease on his behalf with a staggering $165,000 in annual rent, which only increased each year. Turnover was soft, operating costs were crushing, and the promised safety net turned out to be nothing more than extra food at cost. No actual money. Wong ended up working every day, open to close, just to stay afloat. After 18 brutal months, he sold the store at a heavy loss, recovering less than half of what he paid. Meanwhile, the breakneck expansion strategy was starting to backfire. In a rush to dominate the market, Pieface approved location after location without much regard for proximity, demographics, or long-term viability. In some suburbs, you could find 2 or even 3 Pieface stores within walking distance of each other, all run by different franchisees. This internal cannibalisation was a major inconvenience and devastating for new franchisees hoping to carve out a customer base. The arrival of another Pieface nearby could instantly slice their sales in half, and in an already tight margin business, that was enough to push many into the red. Franchisees began comparing notes, swapping stories, and realizing their experiences weren't isolated. The issues weren't bad luck or isolated mismanagement, they were systemic. By 2013, the cracks were no longer private. Franchisees had begun speaking to journalists, and quietly, stories began surfacing in the media. Complaints of financial distress became harder to ignore. Some stores were reportedly paying staff out of pocket, delaying rent, or skipping maintenance just to keep cash flow alive. Workers started complaining of unpaid wages and missing entitlements. Suppliers said invoices were going months overdue, and despite everything unraveling behind the scenes, the head office kept up appearances and publicly insisted that everything was on track and under control. But the company was starting to buckle. The pace of growth had outstripped its ability to manage it. With stores scattered across regions, performance all over the map, and franchisees growing more frustrated by the week, Pieface was losing control of its own network. But instead of hitting pause or focusing on fixing the cracks, the company kept chasing expansion even as the foundation was already shaking. And then, in a move that was framed as a strategic masterstroke but would soon prove catastrophic, Pieface signed a major deal with what was once one of the biggest names in Australia, Caltex. At first glance, the Caltex deal looked like a stroke of genius. Pieface partnering with one of Australia's biggest fuel station chains seemed like the perfect play. High traffic locations, built-in convenience customers, and the chance to reach people who weren't walking into traditional food courts or shopping strips. The idea was to take the same quirky, face-topped pies and sell them from branded counters inside Caltex servos. It was fast, low friction, and didn't require the overhead of setting up a full store from scratch. On paper, it ticked every box. Broader visibility, increased sales, and national distribution without the usual headaches of retail leases. But that shiny strategy came with a catch. These new Caltex locations weren't offered as franchise opportunities. They were operated directly by Pieface's corporate team, meaning the revenue went straight to head office. Suddenly, the same company that franchisees had trusted with their life savings was setting up shop down the road and keeping 100% of the profits. And it only got worse. In many cases, the new Caltex Pieface counters were alarmingly close. Some franchisees reported new servo setups within a few hundred meters of their stores. To add insult to injury, these Caltex locations had serious advantages: cheaper pies, easier access, stronger foot traffic, and the backing of a national retailer with deep pockets and a streamlined operation. Franchisees were suddenly competing against their own franchisor. For independent store owners already struggling to stay afloat, this was the last thing they needed. Sales dropped and customer loyalty eroded. Why would anyone walk an extra block for the same pie at a higher price when they could grab one at the servo while fueling up? Some franchisees reported losing up to 30% of their daily revenue within weeks of a nearby Caltex installation. But more than the financial hit, what really stung was the betrayal. Franchisees had bought into Pieface under the assumption that they were business partners, part of a shared mission to grow the brand. But now, it felt like they were nothing more than disposable outposts. The brand they had invested in, trained for, and built their livelihoods around was actively competing against them, using their own product and undercutting them in real time. Naturally, the backlash was intense. Angry franchisees began organizing, contacting lawyers, and airing their grievances to anyone who would listen. Some lodged formal complaints with the company, while others went public, speaking to journalists about how they'd been blindsided. A few tried to take legal action, citing violations of territorial agreements or deceptive conduct, though going up against a franchisor in court is rarely a level playing field. Many simply walked away. Stores were shuttered, leases broken, and lives upended. By this point, Pieface's reputation was damaged. Trust between head office and its franchise network had all but evaporated. What was once a fast-growing national brand powered by ambitious small business owners had become a fractured ecosystem full of resentment and suspicion. The Caltex rollout turned into a symbol of everything that had gone wrong at Pieface, a reminder that somewhere along the line, the company had stopped building with its partners and started building over them. By late 2014, millions of dollars in investor funds had been burned through. Sales were faltering, franchisees were disillusioned and furious, many of them stretched to the financial brink. The energy that had once powered the brand had vanished, replaced by a sense of chaos and silence at the top. The pressure had been building for months, if not years. Between rapid-fire expansion, internal competition, Caltex backlash, and mounting operational costs, the business was barely holding together. Then came the moment no franchise owner wants to hear: voluntary administration. In November 2014, Pieface officially admitted it couldn't meet its obligations. It owed tens of millions to creditors, a staggering sum for a company that had once boasted about global ambitions. The fallout was brutal. Overnight, dozens of stores were shut down, with some employees being told mid-shift that the business was over. Others arrived the next day to find the doors locked, the lights off, and a note on the window. Workers across the country were laid off with no severance, no support, and in some cases, weeks of unpaid wages. But perhaps no one suffered more than the franchisees. These were small business owners, young entrepreneurs, migrants, couples, and retirees who had poured their savings, loans, and hope into the Pieface dream. Many had signed long leases, some had mortgaged their homes to cover startup costs, and others had taken on personal debt, believing the brand's promises of stability and long-term growth. Now, they were left with nothing. And unlike employees, franchisees weren't protected by the same legal safety nets. When the head office went into administration, their investments were lost and they were still liable for rent, loans, and operational costs. The collapse of Pieface was a personal disaster for a lot of them. It affected their families, their finances, and their futures. The administrators began untangling what was left of the company, but the deeper they looked, the messier it got. Lawsuits were filed, investigations began, and former staff and franchisees came forward with stories of mismanagement, financial misconduct, and broken promises. Documents showed a company chasing growth at all costs, opening stores even as others were failing, signing franchisees into saturated territories, and funneling money toward expansion while day-to-day operations floundered. Between 2011 and 2014, Pieface had gone from startup darling to over-leveraged cautionary tale. What was supposed to be a franchise goldmine had become a financial minefield. The Caltex deal was now viewed as a flashpoint in the brand's unraveling. While it may have brought in short-term revenue, it came at the expense of franchisee trust, long-term brand cohesion, and operational focus. It revealed a company more interested in grabbing quick wins than building sustainable systems. By the time administrators stepped in, there wasn't much left to salvage. The brand had been hollowed out, the franchise network was fractured, the trust was gone, and the smiling pies that once symbolized Aussie fun and entrepreneurial energy had become a painful reminder of what happens when vision, mismanagement, and greed collide. But here's the twist. Pieface didn't actually die. At least, not officially. After administration, the brand was picked up by new investors who saw value in the logo, the recipes, and the servo strategy. Under new ownership, Pieface was stripped down and repurposed. The standalone stores mostly disappeared, and the focus shifted to petrol station counters and licensing deals. Today, you can still buy a Pieface pie, usually from inside a servo somewhere in New South Wales or Queensland. The pies still have faces, but the energy's gone. There's no story left. The bright, cheeky, ambitious food brand is now little more than a relic on petrol station shelves. The customers might not know the backstory, but the franchisees do. The workers who never got paid do, and the suppliers left unpaid definitely do. Pieface is one of the clearest examples of what happens when branding gets ahead of business fundamentals. The idea was clever, the execution was chaotic, and the founders had vision, but sadly, no operational discipline. Instead of building a steady, sustainable foundation, they opted for speed, scale, and marketing flash. The biggest mistake, though, was turning against their own partners. The Caltex deal might have made sense on a spreadsheet, But in the real world, it nuked trust across the franchise system. And in franchising, trust is the business. Without it, everything breaks. Today, Pieface stands as a cautionary tale. Not because the product was flawed or because Aussies didn't want a fun, proudly local pie chain. The demand was there, the branding did work, and the vision had legs. But what brought it all undone wasn't the pies, but the people running the business. In their rush to scale, they put growth before sustainability, revenue before relationships, and corporate control before the very franchisees who built the brand from the ground up. And in the end, it wasn't a competitor that took Pieface down. It was the company itself, smiling on the outside while crumbling from within. But what do you think? Could a model like Pieface actually work if it were done right? Or was it always doomed by the way it tried to grow? Was it the wrong idea or just the wrong execution? Let us know what you think in the comments section below, because we'd love to hear your take. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, give it a like, hit subscribe, and ring that bell so you don't miss the next deep dive into business, brands, and everything in between. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, stay curious.